What's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Sun Belt Syndicate, the Round Ball Roundup edition, which we know focuses on basketball. We're going to have a little bit of a different show tonight. Did not plan for this. Zach was supposed to join me, as he typically does. We were going to get back into the basketball focus now that football is winding down officially now over, as Texas State does go on to victory in their bowl game today to wrap up the football schedule of the Sun Belt Conference. So now we are fully dedicated and focused on basketball and soon baseball moving forward. But unfortunately, Zach is a little bit under the weather, so I will be running solo tonight. However, I did see fan number one here lately, Ben James, jumping in the chat on YouTube already. What's up, Ben? Thanks for joining the program. He's saying, how about them Red Wolves? Yes, absolutely. The only team to get us a victory over AP or ranked team, if you want to say it that way. So congratulations to them as they continue to roll along. And we will also continue to roll along, as we've called this episode tonight Streakin, because we have some teams at the top that have been doing pretty well lately. And we've had some teams at the bottom who have been doing, obviously, the opposite. So we are going to touch on what's gone on since we've last seen you, talked to you, or you've heard us while you drive down the road on the audio version. Whatever it is, we're here to help catch you up. And if you want to throw your questions, comments, if you have concerns, I guess you could throw those in the chat as well as we go along here live and see where this stuff takes us. But we'll start off tonight with taking a look at the standings before we get going any further. The Red Wolves, as we mentioned at the start of the show, do start us off with a 2-0 record now in the conference. And that first column there is your conference record, because we will be going by that first and foremost as we go through the rest of the season, now that conference play has started since the last time we were live. To the right of that will be the overall record. So sitting pretty up at the top are the Red Wolves with an 11-3 overall record, followed closely by what Zach and I think is a very big surprising team as far as we were concerned going into the season anyway, a 2-0 conference start for the South Alabama Jaguars, who also sit at 10-4 overall. Troy also at 2-0. The Cajuns, a very surprising 2-0 after their terrible and abysmal start to the season. Their record overall just 4-10. So a 2-0 conference start for them is a big deal and will be very helpful for them moving forward as they go through their coaching change. JMU, Southern Miss, Marshall, Texas State, Georgia Southern, and ODU all sit at 1-1 within the conference, all pretty much hovering around the 500 mark or just over. In ODU's case, they're actually sitting at just 5-9 on the season. But again, that 1-1 record puts them up, not sitting too bad, with a 5-9 record overall to be 1-1 currently in the conference. And then we have that followed up by all the 0-2 teams to start conference play, which includes Coastal Carolina, App State, a little bit of a surprise there for some people, Georgia State, and followed by ULM, which maybe some people are a little surprised about. Myself took a chance on them being a little bit of a surprise team. Unfortunately, that does not sound or look like it's going to take place this season. But that pretty much wraps that up. Again, a lot of those teams at the bottom there at the 0-2 conference record also not looking too great overall, though Coastal's sitting there right at 500 with a 7-7 mark. And App State had previously been pretty good to start the season until these last four games. They sit at 6-7 overall. Georgia State and ULM sitting down there at the bottom with just 4 wins apiece. So that's a look at the standings. And yes, we will probably be pacing ourselves a little bit faster through this show tonight since Zach's not here to kind of go back and forth with. But Ben does want to chime in and say the Red Wolves play the Jaguars on January 9th. So just around the corner here, that is next Thursday, January 9th, a big-time matchup, especially if they roll in past this weekend with more victories on either side of the ball before we get to that one. So we will go in order from how they sit from first to worst here. So we will start with the Arkansas State Red Wolves. As we can see, their previous games from the last time we did an episode, they played only 4, but they did fare fairly well in those 4 games. On December 12th, they beat UT Arlington 83-79. They got past UAB on December 15th, 98-89. Sounds kind of not that close in the overtime. However, that was one of the biggest, I think actually factually now, statistically, it is the biggest ever comeback in college basketball history to come back and win for that. And Ben is chiming in that that was a great and amazing game, and it absolutely was a shocker of a game, really, when you saw that score early. Did not think the Red Wolves would come back and win that one, but full credit to them. Yes, Ben, they did trail by over 30 points at one point in that game. It looked dead and over. I remember checking in on the score as I was around some family and just said, wow, I was going to try and kind of tune in and check a couple minutes of this out, and I don't think I will. And then, of course, you check Twitter later on and see about this amazing comeback that's taken place, and regret not tuning in. But you only can go with what you know at the time, and that was a little bit of a surprise. So, yes, then our Red Wolves match up with Coastal Carolina and take them down by 30 in their next game and got that 1-0 record to start conference play, and then almost as easily takes care of ODU as they just started the new year off. So the Arkansas State Red Wolves looking very good there early in the season as we go along. And statistically, some of their standouts that we'll look at here before we move on to the next team. We've got Tyron Todd leading the team with 15.7 points per game average. Terrence Ford and Kobe Julian. You just got a number of guys. You've heard their names. You've heard us talk about them. They continue to really improve and get this team to where they want to go moving forward. But it's always interesting to see, a guy that you don't see all the time can still step up for this team. That's the big difference maker, the depth, the bench. They can have a guy come off the bench and go well over 20 points to facilitate a win when somebody that is maybe on the starting spot isn't getting it done. They can go deep into their bench and pull out a victory again, as we saw against UAB specifically in that matchup, and then that big, huge win over Coastal Carolina and the very comfortable win over ODU. Ben's letting us know freshman Josh Hill had a breakout game in both the Coastal and ODU games, so getting off to a hot conference start there for him specifically. All right, and we move on to South Alabama. They played one more game. They played 5 games since we've last checked in with them, winning very comfortably over, and forgive me, I have to check exactly what school that is that I'm looking at there because I can't tell. I think it's the football team that hung right with ODU just a little bit ago when it came to football. East Texas A&M, that's right. FCS East Texas A&M, obviously Division I for basketball. USA gets by them 81-72, and they suffered a pretty big defeat the next night. I'm sorry, it wasn't that big of a defeat. Played a very close game against a TCU team on December 16th, only lost 58-49, so a close battle there with TCU, and then they hammered. This is a very surprising game to me specifically. They hammered JMU 77-49 on December 21st. Then they got a really easy matchup on the 30th there, and that's probably more of a local game. Yeah, the downside to providing the graphics that look nice on screen is that I don't have the space or the ability to add the team name as well or the school name because it would just be a jumbled mess. So I don't know off the top of my head who that red ram with the gold horn is there. I'll try and pull that up as we move along here because it's going to bother me because I just put it together and now I can't see. Spring Hill, I believe, is who that was. No, that's not Spring Hill. My apologies. That would be Mobile University. They hammered them. The local competition there, they win that one 106-41 before getting another big victory over a conference opponent in Georgia State, 77. That score sound familiar? That's the same score they had against JMU. They go for 77 once again to get that 77-51 victory over Georgia State. And Dominic Ambrose, appreciate you chiming in. 106-41 was versus Mobile. That's not a. Now it'll be a logo that I randomly remember because of this interaction, but it's not one that I remembered off the top of my head, unfortunately. And then also confirming that it's the University of Mobile there for that one. As far as who's getting it done for the Jags, let's take a look at who's sticking out there. Miles Corey, no surprise, was an early season scoring machine. He has kept that up and paces the Jags with 17.1 points per game average. Barry Dunning Jr. just had a big game there against Georgia State. He's averaging 6.1 rebounds per game. And Judah Brown coming in, leading the team in blocks. We know him from last season as a standout there for the Jags. So this team really coming into form and looking very good early part of the season here. Jumping over to the next team in Troy. This is a team that has obviously routinely won 20 games a season. They look to be in good shape to possibly, very possibly, do that again this year. I know Zach and I both favored them to do so coming in to the season, so no surprise there. They did struggle a little bit in that game against Houston. Houston ranked number 15 in the country overall when that game occurred. However, they did go down by 20 points to them in that one. The next one is Middle Georgia State. Again, some of these ones I'm going to have to look at. It does say MGA right on their logo, but definitely want to double check myself to make sure I got that one right. They beat Middle Georgia State and LaGrange. Again, these are easy games. These are games they expect to win this big. They are taking care of business as they should. Hey, guess what? We had that 77-point output again, this time for Troy over Georgia State. Once again, Georgia State probably not liking that 77 number too much in this early part of the season as they suffered another defeat there to the Trojans. And the Trojans win the battle of who takes the stairs. As for those that don't know, Troy's head coach did coin the phrase possibly a little earlier than Dustin Kearns over at App State, or at least made it a little bit better known before Dustin Kearns over at App State. But the battle for the elevator shaft versus the stairs, because one gets to keep it, one gets to press the button to go up and down instead. But Troy wins that one 69-61 up there in Boone to ruin the start of the new year for the Mountaineers up on the mountain. Statistically, for the Trojans, again, not a whole lot of surprise here about who's standing out and being an obvious contributor early part of the season. Miles Rigsby up there with 12.1 points per game. Thomas Dowd leads in rebounds, and assist is Tayton Connorway. So pretty good team there. Jackson Fields chipping in pretty well. Marcus Rigsby also on that roster. So the Rigsby bros are taking care of business and making these Troy Trojans look like they are well on their way to another chance at 20 wins on the season. They are also currently on a 4-game win streak. I'll touch more on that once we get to Zach's rankings at the end. We'll also touch on some of the Ken Palm stuff as we move forward from here. Ragin' Cajuns, the surprise team to be up in the conference standings at this point. Again, an abysmal start to the year. They had the injury early on that was greatly going to affect their season one way or another. It seemed to affect things pretty badly. Before we talk about some of their scores, we do have to mention longtime head coach Bob Marlin is no longer the coach for the Ragin' Cajuns. If you missed that bit of news, Derek Zimmerman steps in as the interim coach, and I think he's got the inside track to be full-time coach after how he's turned this team around here in short order. And if he could keep it rolling, then he's going to solidify it even more, as they've done pretty well once they've gotten into conference play here. December 11th, they beat Southeast Louisiana 68-61, a tightly contested battle. Lost a surprising one, not necessarily because they maybe were expected to beat Lamar, at least at that point in the season for sure, but it's how badly they lost to Lamar. They lost 74-45 in that one, so a very shocking score to come out of that one. Then they hosted App State, took care of business. Close game up there to the end. App State had to battle with some, free throws, trying to beat them at the free throw game down the stretch, and it wasn't to be. Cajuns win that one 68-62, and then they they lose. They go down to McNeese 64-56. So you weren't sure what was going to happen after that, but hey, rebounded against Coastal Carolina, winning that game 71-68. So technically, they're really not on much of a winning streak anymore. However, they have the all-important 2-0 start in conference. As we mentioned, we do need to tell you that Karan Davis was indefinitely suspended from the team when Bob Marlin was head coach. There doesn't seem, at least from what I can find, to be any real update on if that suspension will continue as Bob Marlin had given out, or if Zimmerman will change that, and if he can return to the lineup sooner rather than later. Not a whole lot of details. In fact, if you Google Karan Davis and suspension, a whole lot more comes up about Louisville, where he was previously dismissed completely from the team. So this could be a bigger issue, or it could be something that the team is handling internally, and it's not a huge issue, but he does need to serve his suspension time. Again, if I had more details, I would share them here with you. Unfortunately, I do not. So I don't have a ton more to tell you about there for that one. But again, after a terrible start to their season with injuries and record and letting a coach go, they do somehow still start out conference play 2-0. And again, at this point of the season, that's probably the most important piece for what they need to accomplish. Mustafa, again, I'm going to keep saying his first name because I will trip all over the last name, but he is leading the team with 11.9 points per game. Ratliff rebounds almost 5 per game. Michael Thomas leading in assists, and Kentrell Garnett obviously up there with Christian Wright as well. And Karan Davis still up there in the top couple point getters. So if he does return, that will be a big advantage for the Cajuns as they continue further into conference play, but we'll have to see how that transpires. A little bit of a surprise here as JMU isn't one of those 2-0 teams to start conference play, but still okay. 1-1 so far, only played 4 games since we've last taken a look at them. They were up early on Wake Forest on December 17th. Unfortunately for them, they do ultimately fall to the Demon Deacons 75-58 in that one. And then, as we mentioned, some of these we'll go through a little quicker since we've talked about them against previous teams already, falling to the Jaguars 77-49. Then they went up against Midway University, crushed them pretty well, 96-64 before beating Southern Miss 83-72. We know that was a battle last year, so interesting to see that game earlier on this season. Although I don't think it was too late last year either. So, pretty interesting matchup to have, a good matchup to have early on in the season. A pretty close game. 11 points. Nothing got too far out of hand in that one for JMU. As far as some of their leaders go, Bryce Lindsey, 13.4 points per game. Rebounds is AJ Smith with 6. Mark Freeman leads an assist with 3.7, but do need to mention his 30-point output in this last game against Southern Miss. If you are following us on X or Twitter, did mention that in the little fast break, I don't know what you want to call it, post, I guess. I tried out a little bit earlier today. Just a small snippet within 2 or 3 sentences about each game. See if that is something that people like moving forward, to kind of just catch up, a little Sports Center type thing to keep you involved. And as we go along in the season, see if it makes sense to keep that up and provide that for people who are interested. And then we've got a team who, so far, as we've been looking at this, has played the most games out of anybody that we've previously spoken about, as Southern Miss, since we've last seen them, 6 games for them in this one. So they have been quite the busy team. But first, before we get into that, Andre Curbelo has made his way back. He was my preseason Sunbelt Player of the Year. I think that's probably, I don't know. I guess if he plays significant minutes and scores significant amount of points, which he did in this last game, even with the loss, maybe he could battle his way back up to getting his name involved. But with a suspension and the fact he hasn't played a whole lot here till so lately when he came back to the team, we'll have to see what happens with that. But a phenomenal player. There was a reason I picked him to stick out and be one of the leaders on the Sunbelt courts as we move through the season. So we will see if he can continue his way back to the good graces, I guess, writers and media people who cover the Sun Belt for basketball, and see if he can get back up there to have his name mentioned towards the end of the season. They went down pretty big, though, to Tulane, 86-58. Little bit better there against a ranked Ole Miss team at number 19 when they played that one, losing 77-46. So not close, but again, a little bit better than what they showed there in that Tulane game. They also lose to Lamar, just like Louisiana had. They played that game a lot closer, however, 69-65. Really tight matchup with Marshall. Followed that one, a 2-point victory for the Golden Eagles to get them on their way with a victory in conference play. They followed that one up with a win over William Carey. A little bit closer than I would have expected. Just a 10-point game there, an 80-70 victory for the Eagles of Southern Miss. And then again, that one we've already mentioned there against JMU to kind of round that out. And again, we will look at where Corbello sits right now. He's not the leader in the clubhouse, but he is number 2. Denijay Harris, almost leading across the board. Ridiculous talent who has come back to Southern Miss this season to lead the way so far. 16.4 points per game with a rebound average of 10.1. Obviously, one of the best in the conference as of right now. Alvarez leads in assist at 3.6. He also leads in steals, but blocks. Once again, you're hearing that name, Denijay Harris, and I believe Corbello will get back up there if he continues to stay in the good graces of the team and contain whatever issues, whatever problems he's been having on or off the court, and stick with this team and get them back to the promised land, as I predicted kind of a bounce-back year for Southern Miss before we got this one started. Marshall Thundering Herd have also played 6 games since we've last seen them. On the 11th of December, they went up against Wright State, but lost that one, 88-79. They rebounded on the 14th against Ohio, a big-time rivalry between those two programs, with Marshall winning that one 79-70. And then, again, I'll have to look up this one, as West Virginia Wesleyan is that logo that I don't recognize quite there. It's not a bad looking logo. It's kind of like mountains with a W over top, and it's all orange. It's all right. But Marshall gets the better of them pretty easily by 30 points in that one, 93-63. We talked about that Marshall game against Southern Miss, that 2-point loss for them there. They come down to North Carolina, come close to me while I'm not around, obviously, which is kind of funny. But they come to Burlington, North Carolina, to take on the Elon Phoenix, who have been off to a hot start this season. So keep an eye on them as far as bubble teams are concerned, or maybe they take their conference championship. Too early to tell, but they are hot so far this year. So not ultimately surprising to see them fall there to them. However, 73-59, you would have hoped that they could have kept it a little bit better, a little bit closer there. And we know the Marshall faithful has a large fan base in the Triangle area of North Carolina, so probably well represented there in the Elon Phoenix gym. And then they go on and beat Texas State at home 77-71 to help get them back in the win column in the conference, have them sitting at 1-1 thus far. As far as leaders in the clubhouse for the Herd, we have Michael Dawson, 13.2 points per game. Nate Martin, no surprise there to hear that name, leading in rebounds with 7.9 average. Denizé Mingo at 4.8 assists. Dawson again leads in steals, and Obina and Ochili Killen, love saying that name, leads in blocks with almost 2 per game, on that one. So definitely wanted to mention a couple of those things there before we move on to our next team, which would be the Texas State Bobcats. And in the reverse of these 2 previous teams that we just spoke about, instead of playing 6 games, these guys played half that many. They've only played 3 games since we've last taken a look at them. Unfortunately, falling to Florida Atlantic, the Owls there, as is pretty evident by their logo on the screen in that one, falling 89-80. So close battle against a team who's been pretty good over the last several years, but ultimately not a victory for our Bobcats in that one. Followed that up with another loss to UT Arlington. UT Arlington obviously used to be in this conference, so a couple of teams playing them, not ultimately too surprising. They go down in that one 80-72. And then again, we touched on the game against Marshall already that they lost to get their conference play going there before they had, I guess they had that really early game. I can't remember off the top of my head who they even played, but haven't had another conference game here real close lately. Tyrell Morgan leads the team with 15.2 per game. Joshua O'Garrow with 7 rebounds leads them there, and Caden Gums 4.6 assists per game. And Tylen Pope, need to mention his name as well, leads in shot blocks, 1.4 average per game, also scoring 13.6 points per game. So definitely do not want to leave him out in that one. Gonzo chiming in, is South Alabama that much better than JMU, or is there another reason that they beat them so bad? I think that game is to me, it's one of those things where odds makers didn't get this one right, and a lot of it has to do with how matchups specifically happen, and I think that's more to do with what happened in that game. And sometimes you just have off nights, and South Alabama was on and JMU was off. A lot of times you have one or two of those teams like just barely different from what they usually do. I think South Alabama was just really, really hot that night. Everything kind of going right for them. And the opposite was true for JMU, which made that score differential so much of a shock factor and a shock value for when people are seeing that score from the outside. So yeah, I'd venture to say if they matched up 10 more times, it's a lot closer. South Alabama would probably still win the majority of them if I had to choose right now. But I would venture to say that JMU could actually pull off a couple of wins versus them. It's just one of those things where it's just the perfect storm on that night, and South Alabama wasn't going to lose that game. So that just became pretty obvious pretty quickly in that one. But we'll have to see. They could match up again for a conference tournament game. We know that they have the crazy bracket this year, so I can't wait to see how that plays out. I think it's kind of insane. It's intriguing. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a little different. It's absolutely a gauntlet for anybody who thinks they're going to go on any kind of hot run to end the year and get into the postseason. But the kind of cool part is every single team has a shot. I don't care where you are in the standings. You have a shot to get to the conference championship. So pretty interesting. Now you have to run an absolute gauntlet of games like every day or almost every day. But yeah, you can get there, and we'll have to see what happens when that goes down. And Red Wolves play JMU tomorrow is what Ben is telling us as well in that one. All right, jumping over to the next team, Georgia Southern. Again, this is another team I thought coming into this season was going to have a pretty good year with what they had recruited, what they had brought in, what they had kept, the fact they were opening up a new arena to play in. There was a lot of just kind of excitement and stuff building on for this team. Unfortunately for them, their leading scorer, Dante Holloman, is out. Not really sure on his return just yet, but that is going to be a big aspect for the Eagles until he can return to the lineup for sure. They did lose to La Tech on December 13th, rebounded against Gardner-Webb, 86-81. And then the December 21st game against Texas State, they did go down pretty heavily in that one, 83-61. Georgia Southern then rebounded pretty well, getting by a scrappy ULM team. Again, they're not great in the standings, but they do play tough. So they got by them 90-82. So 1-1 record for Georgia Southern at this point, coming in after those 2 games there, going the opposite directions. But as far as leaders in the clubhouses are concerned, Gonzo's got another question here. Got a friend playing at Southern Miss. That's how I found you. Great content. Thanks for the answer. Gonzo, really appreciate it, man. Just to let you know, this show is not usually done solo. We usually have a little bit more of a conversational thing back and forth. Unfortunately, Zach is a little under the weather tonight, but he did send me some notes. I am sharing those with you as I go along. I want to give full credit for him doing that because some of these notes I obviously knew, but there are some good little tidbits in here that he shared that I did not have previously written down. So I appreciate Zach participating, even though he is feeling under the weather and not really feeling like getting in front of a camera. Can't blame them. Sometimes you have those nights. So, and it's also your first year of following the Sun Belt. Well, we hope it gets a little more exciting. I think at this point last year, we had a little bit more excitement with where JMU had started off the season. App State was closely following them. Troy was up there for a long time as well. And then Arkansas State came on hot, which led us to know how they were going to do this year. So, yeah, appreciate you following along. We will continue to kind of put out content as we go along. I'm going to try and maybe do what I did for baseball, which was share some scoreboard aspects kind of the next day in kind of a graphic form, kind of like you see laid out here on the screen if you're watching right now. But I want to kind of make it easy for people to find scores and just put it right in front of them. That way they don't have to go out and find it. Hopefully that helps people just kind of stay up to date kind of easily in that regard because, let's face it, Sun Belt basketball wasn't always put on SportsCenter or ESPN or your typical local coverage. So hopefully we can help provide that as we continue to move forward on the season. Bradley Dawgos has picked up the scoring aspect in Holloman's absence, going for 14.8 points per game. Tyson Brown, a name you need to remember, leading the team in rebounds with just under 5 per game at 4.9 right now. Nakavian White leads in assist, 2.6. Bradley Douglas also leads in steals with almost 2 a game, and Micah Smith averaging just about a block a game. So again, Holloman's been out about half the season, honestly, right now. He's only played 7 games. So kind of crazy to think he's been out that long. He's still technically the leader in points per game at 15.9. But I listed Douglas as he's been the one that's playing as of late. But if they can get Holloman back, this team is a team to look out for sure, moving forward into conference play as we get deeper and go along even further. A little bit of a surprise here with how they started off this season. Also a new coach there in Mike Jones up there in Norfolk as ODU tries to turn around last season's awful record. Not going all that well overall, but fortunately for them, they're only 1-1 in conference. So they're not too much of a big uphill battle to get over in that regard. So jumping into what the Monarchs have done since we've last seen them, unfortunately fall 75-71 to Northeastern before going to an overtime game and getting by the Warhawks of ULM in OT 80-75. And then after that one, playing Virginia Wesleyan, beating them soundly 82-44. And then, as we mentioned before, Arkansas State hammering them pretty good at 78-59 to start their new year off there for the Monarchs. As far as leaders in the clubhouse for them, Robert Davis, 14.2 points a game. Stephon Walker, 8.3 rebounds per game. Jaden Johnson leads in assist with 4 even per game. Callum Swanson-Roger, one of my preseason picks to be a big defender in this conference, averages 2 blocks per game. So shot blocking machine, just needs to maybe pick up on the rebounds a little bit more from what I thought he may be grabbing down there inside the boards as he's got some of the guys on the team grabbing more than him. Sean Duragordon is their leading rebound. Oh, he's not. I'm sorry. I already said that. Walker is actually the leading rebounder with 8.3, but Duragordon is up there with almost 7 a game. So definitely got some talent, some players on this team. If they can continue to keep those guys together and evolve further into this season, maybe ODU can go on one of those South Alabama-esque or Arkansas State-esque runs towards the end of the season. Gonzo saying, funny enough, another friend of mine was playing baseball at Marshall and found out I was going for Southern Miss and had a little back and forth. If you follow baseball, his name is Kelber Peralta. That's a hell of a great baseball name, Peralta. I love that. And now we've got the whole Southern Miss Marshall aspect with football. And if the Sun Belt doesn't make those two teams play on like a Wednesday or Thursday night to make it must-see TV with a great storyline, honestly, the best part too would be if they actually had Marshall host that game because the interactions with Coach Huff from the fan base, the booing, it's just fun, right? You just have fun with it. I mean, I know there's some real thoughts and feelings there. I'm not disregarding those things, but for outsiders, we just love to see what transpires, what kind of goes on. I would assume that Marshall would really pack the house for a weeknight game if Southern Miss were to come up there for that. So yes, it's also cool that it's translating over to even more sports through friends and everything else. So that's awesome to see, and that's a part of the reason why we do this here as we continue to go along. Coastal Carolina, again, another new head coach there. I got to go see a game of theirs live against Coastal Carolina. It was Coastal Carolina who I went to see when they played against the Campbells, which had not previously been there. Very impressive facility and a very good game. Coastal was up huge to start with, so it was a little shocking down the stretch, but they did come away with the victory ultimately after a last-second buzzer beater did not go for the Camels. But on December 11th, they won pretty easily versus, and let me make sure, Southern Virginia Knights to be exact, 82-57. They also got a victory over NC-A&T, 73-68, suffered that 30-point loss to Arkansas State, rebounded nicely with a win over Warner, and got that by them 75-53, and then suffered that close loss, unfortunately for them, at home to the Cajuns, 71-68 there in that one. One of the notes from Zach is that Coastal point guard D.A. Houston is expected back relatively soon, possibly even as early as tomorrow for their matchup there. He's played only in one game thus far this season. I know there was maybe a thought process he may have gone against Campbell while I was there, which would have been kind of cool to have been there during his return. Unfortunately, that did not happen, and he was in the sweats the whole time, so we did not see him on the court. One guy I did see on the court and was very impressed with was Rasheed Jones, who leads the team currently with 13.9 points per game. Rebounds is led by Denzel Hines at 6.5. That's the High Point transfer who came over to Coastal there in that one. Assist leader is Joshua Mio, I believe actually is how you pronounce that, 2.5 per game. Jones leading in steals and blocks is being led by Noah Amhauser. Tripping all over the names in this one, even though that's the game I went to go see, and Noah was a beast on the inside. Campbell didn't do much to contain him, so he really dominated there, and he's a big man and hard to move out of the way, so Coastal should hopefully lean on him down low to continue into conference play and see what they can get done down the stretch. Again, a little bit of a surprise here with where they were last year to where App State has fallen so far this year. Unfortunately, they had a neutral site game against High Point, closely fought battle, but they go down to that one 65-59 in Greensboro, North Carolina. They follow that one up with that 6-point loss to the Cajuns, as we mentioned previously. Then they go down another close game. They're scoring kind of right there in that mid-60s, low 60s output continuously. If they can't get over that 65-point mark, they don't seem to be winning the games, as North Texas also beats them 68-64. Troy also takes care of them 69-61. Again, kind of, I think, mentioned already, a 4-game skid for the Mountaineers here. And unfortunately for them, not necessarily the greatest of opponents to fall to. But the Cajuns getting a little hotter, maybe makes a little sense. Certainly the Troy loss is a little bit understandable. Hopefully you were to get that victory over High Point in North Texas, especially out of conference, to kind of help in that aspect. Miles Tate with a massive output in that game against Troy, but unfortunately not enough, even though he also leads the team with 14.5 points per game. Baberum, a 5.5 rebound per game average. Tate also leading in steals and assists, and blocks is led by Luke Wilson with 1.2 per game, but they quite frankly just need more scoring output. They have 2 guys who average over double figures, and that's it. So they need a little bit more from guys like CJ Huntley, Connors, Dodd, Treadgill. They need some of these guys to step up and start participating a little bit better, a little bit higher output to get them back into the winning column, because they are struggling down the stretch, or not down the stretch. They're struggling currently as they get into the conference play here. Georgia State Panthers, got a note on them as well. Joshua Archer is listed on the roster, but he's not seen playing time. I'm not sure if that's more of a suspension, a little bit more of an injury. There's really not a whole lot of explanation there. So if anyone knows any further info and they want to share that, go ahead and chime in on that one. But getting into their recent scores since we've last looked at them, also a team sliding as they've lost their last 7 straight games. So, nothing big surprise here as we go through 5 of them. We know they're all losses. Lost to Charlotte 77-63, lost to number 2 ranked Auburn at the time 100-59. That one's not necessarily surprising there. Then they go down to Troy, as we've mentioned, lose to a really good Mercer team, at least kind of routinely good, I should say, in the Southern Conference basketball. They only lose 71-68 in that one, so at least a respectable loss, but then they rebound with a bad loss again, like we've mentioned, to South Alabama, 77-51. So, yeah, if they could get Archer back on the roster, or at least back to playing time, that would definitely be advantageous for the Panthers, as they greatly miss him so far this season. Zakir Nutter leads the team with 14.8 points per game. Nick Mullen averaging 10 rebounds. Malachi Brown, 3.1 assists per game, 1.4 steals per game. And in blocks, they are led by Caesar Edwards. So they've got some players that are contributing. They just play a little bit easier schedule, for one, because they had some tough matchups there with Auburn and Mercer. And it didn't start off with 2 easy conference games, because they had Troy and South Alabama, as we know, 2 of the leaders up there in the clubhouse chasing down Arkansas State as well. So interesting to see what they've had to do and go up against so far. And we'll see if Georgia State can get back into their winning ways and end this long losing streak that they've suffered here to start the year. And we'll round out the 14th team in conference. And a reminder for those tuning in that either don't know or just need to be reminded, there is no East-West. Okay, we got to get away from that thinking. In football, there is an East-West. The champions meet. It's real easy. This is a 14-team league, and there is no divisions. There is no split. So these teams are all listed from first to worst throughout the rest of the season. There's not going to be any more divisions or easy way to kind of sort them as we go through this, but we will do our best to help you sort it. And that continues on, as I said, with the ULM Warhawks. First bit of news and notes to share from Zach is that Keith Richard, the long-time head coach over there for ULM, will be retiring at season's end. So a little bit of a disappointing thing, but obviously something that everyone knew would eventually come because he's been in this conference for a very long time. I think he's tied with and now he may probably be the leader in the clubhouse with Marlon gone to who's been coaching in this league the longest tenure. There's the word I was looking for. So we'll see what happens there, who may take over down there at ULM. But again, 4-game skid here. They did get that first victory over Arkansas Pine Bluff, 89-73, before suffering these 4 straight losses. The first one to UT Arlington, 77-68. Then Houston Christian, 74-68. Then they went down and again in overtime, as we've already talked about, with ODU 80-75 and 90-82 loss to Georgia Southern. As far as kind of who's leading the way for the Warhawks thus far, we've got Jalen Bolden, 13.3 points per game, also leading in rebounds with 6.7. Tyrese Watson, 4.2 assists per game, steals Bolden yet again. And in blocks, Makai Willis with just under, 0.7 blocks per game. So a little bit under the 1 block per game average there for them. So unfortunately, the struggles continue there for the Warhawks. And now we will get into the last little bit of the show. Again, a little bit shorter of a show since it's a solo episode today. This is the last rankings that had come out from Zach before this week started. So you have to take in mind that some of these things may look a little different if you were to rank them today, literally. But these came out Sunday before the results of the midweek games here. So this is what we're seeing right now. Arkansas State is his number 1 in KenPom, sitting at 97 overall, easily the highest team. In fact, a couple of these first teams here in his rankings also kind of just match up with KenPom. So we'll see, how much that changes going on. Troy jumps up in his rankings to number 2. They sit at 117 overall in KenPom. Just behind them actually is South Alabama, who's actually 4th here because, again, games earlier this week had not yet taken place. So he had Texas State sitting above them, but Texas State had just fallen down. They sit at 138 in Ken Palm currently. Again, Arkansas State do need to mention that they are on a 6-game win streak. So we had some of those teams streaking down there at the bottom in a bad way. We've got some of the teams at the top here, including USA on a 3-game win streak and Troy on that 4-game win streak. Easy to see why those 3 or 4 teams are up there near the top. JMU did drop down a couple spots to number 5. Georgia Southern comes in at number 6. App State at number 7. It's after JMU. Honestly, all these teams are 200 plus in Ken Palm, and after Southern Miss, all these teams are 300 plus or worse in Ken Palm. And just so you know how bad that is for those teams at the bottom, there is only 364 teams total in the Ken Palm rankings. So we really need those numbers to climb up to improve on what we're looking at for this season as far as the Sun Belt is concerned. I don't think we're looking at a 2-bid league. I think we were a lot closer to that last season with JMU and App State. I don't think we've got 2 there standing out. However, Troy maybe does stand a chance. South Alabama's looking pretty good to stand a chance. Maybe JMU turns it back on. Maybe App State flips the script. But there's a lot of work to do for those teams that aren't already at the top of the conference and already sitting there with a good record overall to have any kind of shot in any kind of tournament thing. Much too early to really be thinking that route. But I just wanted to mention that because of where some of the things sat last season at this point in time. We were not quite there yet with this season. So we'll have to see how things move along. But I appreciate everybody for tuning in, whether you're watching live, not watching live, but maybe listening live as this phone or tablet or something sits somewhere else and maybe you've got some headphones in. Greatly appreciate it. And if you're tuning into the audio version of this the next day, also greatly appreciate that. Maybe you're checking it out on the way to the game. Again, we'll get back to our regular setup and schedule in this and go back along the way we like to do things. But since we had scheduled this show, I didn't want to cancel it for any reason. Wanted to catch it up. And also, kind of helps me when I talk about it out loud. So hopefully that kind of helps you guys as well. And we will see you guys next time.